have in place, particularly the trees, to, in the sense of healthy life and quality of life for the people who live there. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Elisa. Ms. Nina.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Fabulous. I'm not great with Zoom. Hi, everybody. I am Nina La Negra, and I've been a 10-year resident of Lower Roxbury and the South End, and over 25 years a resident of Roxbury. I'm an artist, and I'm actively engaged in helping to preserve and strengthen the community at large, and for Black and Brown people specifically in Lower Roxbury and Greater Roxbury. And first, let me just thank you all for the opportunity to speak. Thank Council President Janey, councilors and Chair Wu, City Councilor Mejia, and the rest of the august members of the council, the three chiefs, the administrators, and the public at large. We welcome your support in this vital matter. And as a participant in the Friends of Melnea Boulevard group to save the trees for over 6 years, even though they've been meeting for almost a decade now, I've learned a few things about my neighborhood. And one thing I've learned is that everyone cares deeply about the trees and the people who benefit from them in Roxbury. It's been an honor and a pleasure to work with Friends of Melnea Boulevard, a diverse, dedicated, and diligent group of people who volunteer their time and experience and have an overwhelming compassion for the residents of our neighborhood. And you'll hear from many of them during the course of this meeting. And most of you here know the history of this neighborhood, but I'd like to briefly summarize and add one comment. The comment first. We are a community under attack, at siege, at war, between the opioid crisis, gentrification, affordable and low-income housing rental rates increasing, academic institutions overbuying and overbuilding, and finally, the decimation of our urban forests that mitigates climate change, public health issues, and environmental justice issues. We're being attacked in a callous manner by the management of this project. We're experiencing the third and perhaps deadliest wave of gentrification and urban renewal in Boston. The first back in the 30s when the businesses and some people were displaced in the New York streets area. The second in the 80s when Black home ownership dropped from 39% to 12% in 2015. And this third wave, which is marked by the ongoing demolition and destruction of community institutions like the Harriet Tubman House and the proposed destruction of over 120 trees and damage to more than 200 additional. Back in the second wave in the 70s, when over 2,000 homes were destroyed, thousands were displaced, and the trauma experience continues to send shockwaves throughout this city. So in a city of first, all of you and the mayor himself, who was recently appointed the new chair of National Climate Mayors Group, he and you can do the following to support us, and that is 1, cease this project, 2, create a true community process, and 3, build a greenway on Melnea Boulevard, which would mitigate all of these damaging issues that we're experiencing today, with the highest asthma rate in the city of Boston, if not Massachusetts, being right here in Roxbury. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. La Negra. Now let's go to the three chiefs. I think you might have your own order that you've decided. Of course, Chief of Equity, Carolyn Crockett, Chief of Streets, Chris Osgood, and Chief of Environment and Parks, Chris Cook. And I'll just note, feel free to take all the time that you would like, but if we can wrap your statements by 5:25, then each of the councilors will have a 5-minute section Q&A with this panel before you all have to leave at 6. So that would be great.
Councilor, thank you so much. I'm going to lead off. I'm Chris Osgood. I have the honor of serving as Mayor Walsh's Chief of Streets, and as Councilor Wu said, joined by Dr. Crockett, our Chief of Equity, and Chris Cook, our Chief of Environment, Energy, and Open Space, and also joined by a number of other members of the administration, our Transportation Commissioner, Greg Rooney, our City Engineer, Parajat Singh, our Director of Transportation Planning and Policy, Vineet Gupta, and our Senior Planner, Pat Hoey. I imagine there's others as well, but it's very much in the spirit, Councillor, of your comments. I do want to provide some context, but before I do that, really thank you, Councillor Janey, Councillor Melnea, the councillors, and as has been said, fellow panelists, and the public for joining in this conversation. I'm going to bring up this, hopefully, which now we can see, and I'm just going to quickly sort of walk through the Melnea Cast project, really starting with where we are and what's ahead. So where we are right now, as folks I think very well know, the project is paused. And it is paused in many reasons for a lot of things that came up, both in the opening statements of the council, the opening statements of the panelists, and the members of the public. Because of the overwhelming response we have heard from constituents, we want to make sure that we are planning with the community this investment in this corridor. And so we're taking the time as this project is paused to be able to have venues like this, venues like the community meetings that we hosted a couple of months ago, to really be able to engage stakeholders. And as we do that, to also do some of the additional analysis that has been asked of us by the community. So to take a look at the current design and see if there are ways that that current design can be modified to save trees. In addition, to think about broader concepts, broader changes to what has been proposed that can advance community priorities and save additional trees. And then very much in line with Mr. Lisa's comments, to be able to review the actual environmental impacts and be able to think about approaches that we can take to make sure that we are taking care of this forest that we have here in the heart of our city. That is where we are. What we have ahead is really two pieces. One, very much in line with one of the closing comments of Ms. Bonegra, to think about how we have a robust community process that makes sure that we are thinking about the steps forward on this project with the community. And second, in line with something which is requested by CLF, among others, and as Stacey covered in her opening comments, if we do go forward with any design that would require the removal of a tree, to go forward with the tree clearing as part of the project. So that's where we are, and that's what's ahead. I'm going to quickly just give some quick context setting on the project overall before turning it over to Dr. Crockett and the Chief Cook. This project, as folks probably are very well aware, in many ways had its part of its roots in the Roxbury Strategic Master Plan in 2004, which called for the redesign of Melnea Pass Boulevard. The actual community process started 9 years ago now, which is some slides from the initial presentation in the lower right. You see some of the initial objectives that were called for and that were thought of as priorities as part of this project. Make it more of a neighborhood street, improve pedestrian safety and access. Some of those things have remained sort of heart of this project throughout its 9 years of design. One, which obviously was the focus of our council hearing yesterday, was around safety. We looked at some of these maps yesterday in our council hearing. As folks know, the Boston Transportation Department has mapped where there are high frequency or high clusters of crashes on certain streets across the city. These three maps show from left to right the streets that have the most, the top 3% of streets that have the most number of crashes involving vehicles. In the middle, the top 3% of streets that involve crashes that include cyclists. And on the right, the top 3% of streets that have crashes that involve pedestrians. There are very few streets that are in the top 3% on all three of those modes, and Melnea Pass, unfortunately, is one of those. So safety was a priority, obviously, in 2011. It was a priority that I know that every single one of us shares today, has been a priority as part of this project, but is part of one of several priorities that are, we would know that the community is interested in advancing as part of this effort. In addition to increasing safety, certainly that notion of being a tree-lined street, a greenway, as Renata just mentioned, and really sort of thinking about how it's has that feeling of a neighborhood street. In addition, Melnea Pass Boulevard is a street which, in addition to urban healing concerns, also is a place that has experienced flooding situation that we want to be able to address as part of the redesign. And then just making sure that we're making investments in the redesign of the street that supports people no matter how they're traveling throughout the corridor, but particularly to be able to improve opportunities to walk, bike, transit, etc. With these 4 objectives in mind, the current plan has a set of designs, and these are sort of elements of the current design which is before us. In terms of increasing safety, the notion is to table the intersections at Albany Street near Orchard Gardens, to be able to table the intersection at Washington Street, to be able to have raised crosswalks as you're turning off of Melnea Boulevard to signal that you're entering into a residential neighborhood, and to improve sight lines throughout the corridor through protected intersections. In addition to that, there is a focus of expanding sidewalks, improving lighting, having a net increase in the number of street trees. I'm sure we can sort of talk more about that. Increase public art opportunities throughout the corridor. To make sure that we're improving resiliency to actually reduce the amount of overall sort of hardscape and asphalt that is throughout the Melnea corridor, and put in stormwater management best practices to be able to deal with some of the flooding that exists. And then, in addition, make sure that we're being able to encourage that sort of mode shift that we know the residents have an interest in. So the current design calls for improved bike accommodations on both sides, the cycle tracks on both sides, making adjustments to bus stops, etc. One thing I wanted to note is that one of the things that was called for or was identified in the 2004 plan, I believe in the 2011 presentation as well, was actually making this a bus rapid transit corridor. We actually heard early on in the process that was not of interest to the community for the very specific reason of the impact it would have on trees. And so that is not part of the current design, and certainly reflects the interest of the residents. To a point that many have made, Councilor O'Malley made it in his opening comments, and I know others did as well. Our interest in the work going forward is not to pit these things against each other, to pit sort of safety against resiliency, resiliency against trees, trees against motion, etc., but really to find a design path forward working with the community that can help us towards the Melnea Boulevard that really strengthens not just the Roxbury community, but as Mr. Lisa said, the community as a whole. So again, where we are, the project is currently paused while we go through this process of engaging stakeholders, of looking at the current design, exploring new concepts, of doing that deeper analysis on environmental impacts. And when we go forward, and we expect to be able to start or restart the community process this winter, we will do that obviously with the community, and in any process going forward where we will be removing, if we remove a tree, we would certainly have a tree clearing as part of that. So that is the quick update on where we are. It's now my pleasure to pass it over to the next member of our panel, our Chief of Equity, Dr. Huck.
Thanks, Chief Osgood. Appreciate that. And thank you very much. Good evening to Chairwoman Wu for convening us, President Janey, and Councilor Mejia for convening all of us for this really important conversation. Really appreciate residents and advocates, folks really taking their time to make sure that we have a space to talk and to be in conversation. And thank you for the conveners and makers here. So my name is Carolyn Crockett. I was appointed as the Chief of Equity for the City of Boston this summer. Essentially, my charge is to embed equity in all city plans, processes, and practices moving forward, and to guide the city's work with an intersectional lens that centers economic inclusion, racial equity, wellness, and gender equity, with a targeted focus on communities of color and immigrants. And so an important piece of work, and so this process and this project are particularly important because there's so much at stake and there's so much in the conversation that's important. I know well the history of the corridor, and I know of this corridor in particular, and I know how important it is for residents to continue to inform city plans in general and this plan in particular. So as Chief Osgood mentioned, he paused the process for Melnea Cast's redesign at the end of the summer to allow for a closer review of the design plans as they have been presented to the public. The real purpose of this pausing, as well as the ensuing community meeting that we convened in September, was to really seek a way forward that prioritizes safety, which is the focal point of this project, pedestrian safety, rider safety for cyclists and vehicles, and also minimizes tree removal. And so it was quickly apparent that there had been a need to come back to the conversation because it seems like both the intent, the focus, and the process of planning and engagement of the public had sort of lost purpose with each other. And so we, meaning the Offices of Equity, Transportation, and Environment, Energy, and Open Space, convened an evening Zoom meeting on September 15th. It's wonderful to see that many people who are actually here in this hearing were a part of that discussion. And the meeting was really about discussing the status of the project. To hear public questions, comments, and concerns. Chief Osgood has called for the meeting and paused the process in response to, again, concerns, questions, and it seemed like somehow how the message about what this project is about had been lost, and the city takes responsibility for that. The meeting included about 100 people who were there, representing many area residents and advocates who have been active in the public process to date, including members of the Friends of Melnea Cast, United Neighbors of Lower Roxbury, folks from Madison Park CDC, as well as the Cyclists Union. And so what's interesting and what's important about that conversation is that it really let us know that there was more work to do in terms of discussing this project and also making sure that there was a clear understanding of what residents were advocating for and to understand how that could further inform the design process moving forward. And so we have agreed to pause the process to have more of an internal review of design options with the vendor, with also an ongoing conversation with Mass DOT and the discussion with other city departments to see what we might be able to bring back out to the public in a meeting that will happen later this winter. We had originally hoped that that meeting could have taken place in October, and apologize that the timeline has extended, but it's a set of conversations that I have been a part of and watching so that we could bring a fuller representation of design scenarios to the public in a few weeks. And so again, we have agreed to focus on minimizing the number of trees that needed to be removed while maintaining the project's overall goal of improving and increasing safety. And so again, understanding that somewhere along the way in terms of this project, in terms of our engagement process, and the public understanding of the focus of the project, there's been something, somehow the train has gotten off the track. And so before us, the consideration is what is it that we can do to potentially salvage this project, especially if it means that we need to really think about not only reducing and basically avoiding tree removal. I will say this, and then I'll close to yield my time to Chief Cook, is that one of the things that we have found that has been striking to me is we do not have disagreement about the value and importance of tree canopy and tree cover. We do not have disagreement about the necessity of making sure neighborhoods, particularly environmentally vulnerable neighborhoods like Roxbury, have this level of environmental focus and protection. But we are also, I know I am concerned also right now about the health of these trees as they are. So want to make sure that there's a way to separate out two different concerns, and if that's part of what we need to do during the pause, it's important. The health of some of the trees that remain, some of them that are near death, some of them that are a bit sickly, is concerning. And so we don't need to use that as a way to justify removing trees, but we need to have some kind of answer and some kind of consideration for that. So I'll pause here and definitely look forward to the conversation and questions. As Chief of Equity, just look forward to just continue to be involved in this process and making sure we can get a reset that works, particularly for folks who are concerned. So Chief Cook, I yield to you. Thank you for, again, the invitation.
Councilor, thank you very much for the opportunity to testify to butcher Shakespeare. I understand that brevity is the soul of wit, so I will be as quick as possible. I just want to recognize that I'm not going to be more eloquent on the value of trees than those who have already testified, and I want to thank Sarah and Caroline, Jennifer and Luis and Nina making all those points. And as Carolyn Crockett said, I don't think there's any disagreement at all with the value of trees moving forward. I do think it's important to look at some of the environmental context that my cabinet will be working with Chief Osgood in the evaluation of this project moving forward, and that is, what is the relation between trees and heat, and what are the environmental benefits and or trade-offs of advocating for different transit projects, and where are the opportunities that we can actually scaffold success. So a little bit of context: last year we conducted a LiDAR study of the city of Boston's tree canopy. That set a technical analysis for us to go out with an urban forestry RFP to develop an action plan to increase our urban tree canopy. That's focused on a lot of different environmental benefits. Many of them have already been mentioned. But the most impactful environmental benefit of urban tree canopy is clearly its effect on the urban heat island effect. And it's definite, that is acutely an effect in our environmental justice neighborhoods like Roxbury. So when we're looking at any loss of canopy or the potential to actually gain canopy in some of these neighborhoods, we really have to look at it through that lens. So a big part of our urban forest action plan, and one of the major tenets of our actual RFP, was embedding environmental justice and embedding equity into the decision making. I believe it was Luis who said, the community can't be planned for, the community has to be planned with. And that's really a tenet of our urban forestry agenda moving forward. Based on heat, though, as early as 2015 and before that, heat is a vulnerability. Sea level rise and stormwater management gets a lot of attention, but heat kills in America today. And so we really have to take drastic action to reduce heat and the effects of it as we prepare for our climate reality and as we deal with the climate crisis that we find ourselves in. It won't be too long before the city of Boston has 90-day heat waves, and today we only experience 3-day heat waves, and we designate it. So to prepare for that, the number one thing that we can do is actually expand the tree canopy in the city of Boston, and that's why we look to partner with the Boston Transportation Department. One last thing I would just want to call attention to is that we are starting a heat vulnerability assessment right now through the Environment Department. We're proud to receive a municipally vulnerability preparedness MVP action grant from the Commonwealth, and we'll be partnering in partnership with the Resilient Districts Collaborative, the Metropolitan Area Planning Council, the Metro Mayor's Climate Preparedness Task Force, the City of Chelsea, as well as other surrounding communities to make sure that we're all taking action as a region while we're also taking action locally. So I'm here to answer any questions that the council may have, and very appreciative of this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Chief Osgood, Dr. Crockett, and Chief Cook. Really appreciate it. We are going to have just enough time for everyone, I think, except for me, to have 5 minutes, so I'll sneak in some at the end before you all, I know, have a hard stop and a lot to do. So we'll start with Council President Kim Janey, and I'm going to time my colleagues as well so that everyone gets their time in before our administration folks have to leave.
Thank you. Please time me. Many thanks again to everyone that we just heard from. I think it's really important that we don't repeat. So you heard a lot of the history here as people, the public, as well as panelists spoke. And so we don't want to repeat, the history here. We don't want to compound decades of redlining and systemic racism that we've heard about, particularly in this neighborhood. And I know you've said that the project has been paused, that there will be some more internal conversation. And a question really is just about that planning and how do we open up those internal conversations to include more voices from the community? Because what we don't want is then, those internal conversations to happen, all of those trade-offs, all those discussions, the opportunities, the challenges, all of that stuff happens. You come up with a new plan, then you bring it out, and then here we are again. So, one question is, how do we open up the planning process internally as this is paused and many of the chiefs on this call are rethinking what the design could be? I think it's also important to highlight what Chief Osgood already said, which is that we're not really interested in hearing about false choices, about either it's the trees or it's about multi-mode transportation and safety. So I think it's and both for the people on this call. That's the challenge for us to figure out, is how we do both. So how do we open up the planning process and get more voices in there?
So I can start, and certainly other members of the panel, both community members and my fellow administration colleagues can obviously weigh in as well. One of the things which we took away from the September committee conversation was sort of a clear charge to sort of do some additional work just to understand, not design specifics, not get to the point where you've sort of fully sort of wrestled with a whole bunch of design elements, but instead just in general, what direction should we go, and do a little bit more of that environmental baseline and understanding of potential impacts and opportunities along this corridor. That's what we're doing right now, and then our interest sort of come this winter, as Dr. Crockett mentioned, is really to have to re-engage the community or engage the community in that sort of open and transparent process. I think we're still very much designing what that will look like, and open obviously to feedback as part of this session on recommendations. We've received some already from the Friends of Melnea Cass Boulevard on processes that we could follow, which we're certainly looking at as part of it.
And I think that's important. So I'm glad that those conversations are happening. There was a deep concern that trees were being removed without a hearing, that the park, so I don't know what the chief cook, what the process is. My understanding is that if we're removing trees, that there's got to be a hearing. And there was a lot of concern that we weren't following that as a city. And that's in large part why I called a city council hearing, because, community wanted a voice to get out their concerns in a much more, I think, public way. I mean, there have been lots of meetings that advocates have been having, and I know you guys have been having, internally. But my question really is how we bring folks together. Why is it that we did not have a hearing, and will we have a commitment for future hearings? And I'm hopeful that the new plan isn't going to have tree removals, but I think the point here is the importance of engaging the public along the way, and I think people really felt shut out from that process.
Sure, Counselor, if it's all right, Chief Osgood, I can touch on that very briefly. Historically, street widening projects, large-scale transportation infrastructure projects by the state, they're actually exempt from that law. So if there's a street widening, you actually don't need the tree hearing removal. There was a crossover between the DOT and BTD design process of this, where it was determined this was a street widening project, and we wouldn't need to have that tree hearing. At the last public meeting, Counselor, largely in respect to all the issues that you've brought up, Chief Osgood made a commitment that any tree that's in the public realm as part of this project will receive that tree hearing as part of the project. And so Chief Osgood has already made that commitment. It wasn't a determination by the Parks Commissioner, Ryan Woods, at all. And in fact, if you want to find a very good tree supporter, there's one in Ryan Woods. So moving forward, we're totally committed to that process. And I think that alleviates the confusion around people not having a voice about any potential removal.
I know my time is running out. I have questions around language access, how we're getting information out to people. Obviously just in English, but also in other languages. We need to make sure that everyone has the opportunity to participate. And then there's a larger question around the overall design and how it fits in with the other development projects that are happening close by, particularly in Nepean Square. So I think it's really important I don't know if BPDA is on this call, other departments may need to be part of this thinking, and if someone can quickly respond, because I'm sure I'm out of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. The quick response will go on to the next counselor.
Thank you.
Upscale language access, very happy to loop back on that. And the DPA has been very involved in some of the pieces of this, and happy to make sure they're part of subsequent conversations as well.
Thank you. Councilor Mejia.
Yes, thank you so much. So I'll just pick back up on the language access piece, because that is usually my my spiel. So don't worry, Council President, I will keep on with that thread. I'm curious in regards to the language access. In addition to just being able to have things translated and interpreted in multiple languages, I'm always curious about those folks who don't know how to read or write even in their own native language. So in terms of communication overall, I think that it's something for us to really think about in terms of the level of engagement that was put forth in this effort. And I'm just curious what that looked like.
It's a great question. I think there's a big opportunity for us in the next round of engagement in front of us to go even further. But over the last now 9 years, there have been a series of public workshops. I think there were 8 community meetings, a number of sort of site visits as part of the conversation, and then a lot of, sort of direct conversations with the Friends of Melnea Cass Boulevard and other stakeholders along the entire corridor. I think, as we sort of talked about yesterday, I think there are some things which we've been able to do over the course of the last several months, not just within the Public Works and Transportation Department of the city, but across the entire administration. Running community meetings in multiple languages, having materials translated in multiple languages, and to your broader point, thinking about how we just make the community process more accessible, that as we pick back up the community process are lessons that we can bring into our next round of engagement. If there are specific sort of techniques you have in mind, I'm very happy to.
Yep. And I'm going to just say this because I only have 5 minutes, and I'm not going to give you in those tips and techniques during my little time, so I'll follow up with you at a separate situation. But I want to get to some of my additional questions here. Don't be eating up on my time here, Chief. I'm just curious, you said that there were a number of different meetings that were had with Friends of the Melnea Cass Boulevard, but I'm just curious about how many meetings, can you give me a number, and how many people attended those meetings, and if you heard a strong opposition, why did we move forward with the project of removing 124 trees?
I think I appreciate both the specific question and the broader question. The specific question, and there are others on the city team who might more specifically be able to talk about the level of engagement. In fact, there's members of the public who were probably part of almost every single one of these. But I believe there were 2 public workshops, there were 4 public site walks, 8 community meetings, 14 meetings, I believe, with the Friends of Melnea Cass Boulevard, and then a number of sort of like direct outreach and sort of pop-up meetings along the corridor, whether sort of along the entire stretch of Melnea Cass Boulevard. We've heard a lot of feedback over the course of those 9 years, and the design has changed fairly significantly as a result of the public feedback. I would say that we got to a point, and this is more of a point of clarification. We got to a point where the actual number of mature trees, healthy mature trees, was actually far fewer than it had been sort of initially in the plan. So just for folks' awareness, what is currently sort of the pause design, so to speak, has 105 trees in total, of which 26 are dead, another 17 are in poor condition, and then that leaves, I think, 62 trees that are going to be are good in good condition or in fair condition. Most of them are in good condition that would be removed. Obviously, we've heard throughout this entire process the concern about the trees, but there have been a number of strengths to the current design, which is why the design progressed to this point in time. Clearly, though, we are here because we've heard the very strong feedback that even though 62 is too many, we want to see if there's ways to the council president's point of making sure that we can reduce the trees while still advancing the other priorities as part of the project.
I definitely want to get one more question in, okay? So
30 seconds left.
Oh, dang. Chief, you better stop talking so much. I need to know really quick, if you could tell me, how does this plan fit into the city's commitment